Hi, my name is Juliana Ray, and my new album is Hush, with the single Hummingbirds and Harbor Lights, and you are listening to U.S. Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to U.S. Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world, or out of this world. I'm Tom Guild. In 1966, the first episode of Gene Roddenberry's TV show Star Trek launched a franchise still going strong nearly 60 years later. Star Trek presented a progressive, optimistic future where the people of Earth transcended national and international politics. We had our act together as a planet. Something most people don't know is that the original Star Trek adapted mid-century modern furniture for set design, from the bridge to the conference room, even the buildings on the planets they landed on. Today we have a follow-up to our previous episode, Where No Furniture Has Gone Before.
Dun-dun-dun.
On that show, we interviewed Dan Chavkin and Brian McGuire about their book Star Trek Designing the Final Frontier, the untold story of how mid-century modern decor shaped our view of the future. Now George has traveled to Kingsland, Georgia to see and sit on that special Star Trek furniture. You'll hear from Ray Tesi, owner of Neutral Zone Studios, and Vic Mignogna, executive producer of the web series Star Trek Continues, which completed that first 5-year mission. Later on, a conversation with musical guest Amanda Carr. And now here's your host, Mr. Modernism, George Smart.
Thanks, Tom. As our 14 listeners know, I'm a Star Trek fan. Not enough to do cosplay at conventions, but enough to go to Kingsland, Georgia to see a full-scale replica of the original 1960s production set. As it turns out, there are more of these sets. There's another in Ticonderoga, New York. And for several years back in the 2000s, there was Star Trek The Experience at the Hilton in Las Vegas, the same Hilton where Elvis played back in the day. The one in Las Vegas was of Star Trek The New Generation, however. Last year saw the launch of the website Roddenberry.x.io, named for the series founder Gene Roddenberry, where you can take a virtual tour of pretty much every ship in every version of Star Trek, old and new. One particular element binds Star Trek to modernism, and that's optimism about the future. Both Star Trek and modernist design evoke feelings that tomorrow will be better than today, that people will be better behaved tomorrow than today, and that the structures we create will be calm, humane, and beautiful from stem to stern. Live long and prosper, architecture fans. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by June Goldfinger and Jeff Taylor, sponsors of Circle, Square, Triangle, a traveling exhibition on the architecture of Myron Goldfinger, and by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Toronto, Los Angeles, Malibu, and Palm Springs.
Ray Tesi is the founder and president of Neutral Zone Studios in Kingsland, Georgia. It's named after the region of space in Star Trek separating the Federation from the Romulans. The Neutral Zone is an 18,000 square foot building pretty much in the middle of nowhere. It contains a full-scale set for Star Trek the Original Series, including the bridge, transporter room, engineering, sickbay, crew quarters, and of course a Jefferies tube. This full soundstage provides sets and lighting for world-class Star Trek nerds, and we say that with utmost affection, to produce fan films. But Ray's not the first owner. The guy who created all of this and still actively supports the Neutral Zone is Vic Mignogna. He was the executive producer of the web series Star Trek Continues, for which the Neutral Zone sets were originally built. And he plays a damn good James Tiberius Kirk also. From a galaxy far, far away, yes, I know we're mixing space metaphors, but here's George inside the Starship Enterprise in Kingsland, Georgia, with Ray Tesi and Vic Mignogna.
Let's start with a prayer. Gentlemen, will you say this with me?
Sure.
These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise.
These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise.
Its 5-year mission
To
explore strange new worlds,
to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no man has gone before.
Whoosh. Perfect. That's how you have
Great.
to open the Church of Star Trek.
Oh, there you go.
Right there.
There you go. That's fair.
When you said, let's say a prayer, I thought, oh my goodness, what did we get ourselves into here?
So I brought you all a copy of this great book by Dan Chavkin and Brian McGuire.
Yep.
Dan is an acquaintance of mine from Palm Springs, and he and his partner Brian, who is more the Star Trek fan, put this together a couple of years ago. And it's a great history of how all of the designers that were popular during that time, architects and others, created the furniture that was on the Enterprise, as well as the planets where they visited, the set design for all of that. This was all plunked from when they went down to their local high-end furniture store.
Exactly.
And bought a Saarinen chair and brought it back and put some sprinkles on it. And now...
Called it their own. Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
And it has photos of every object. So you can also use this as a reference guide if you want to, do props and things.
Yeah. Now, do you own this book, Ray?
I do not have one.
Okay, now you do, because I actually owned this book already.
Okay, good.
That's what a nerd I am. And all you need to do, Ray, it says on the inside, I noticed too, Ray and Vic, you just scratch out that and Vic part. Scratch out the and Vic part. Look, they gave this book just to me.
There you go.
Yeah, what an amazing book. So comprehensive. And it's amazing how they just picked up, we've talked about this in all the tours we give, that Star Trek's biggest challenge was budget, was trying to keep costs down. Mm-hmm. And you don't reinvent the wheel. You just find things that already exist that you feel like you can use or repurpose in some small way or modify in some small way. And they did that so well. And a lot of that mid-century furniture and that look was reflected so clearly in the original series.
I think one of the most famous examples of that was just how they opened the doors, right? Because they didn't have the mechanics to do it electronically. They just had two guys, right? On
Yeah,
either
I had
side.
a guy with a pulley pulling ropes open
exactly.
on cue. Yeah.
Exactly. And the story, there's a side story that in the late 60s, Otis Elevator visited Paramount to see the technology behind the sliding doors.
And they were probably very disappointed.
They were.
They're like, let's see what mechanical masterpiece they
And
created.
Otis Elevator, just like many of the other devices we carry today, Otis Elevator developed the sliding door based on what they saw.
And I seem to recall from my geekdom of Star Trek, wasn't there a medical device company that wanted to sue Star Trek because they showed the medical bed that measured all your vital signs, and they were working on this in 1966
I don't
and thought
know.
that
Well, I had not heard anything about that, but what I have heard, I've actually read articles over the last 2 or 3 years that technology is being developed right now.
Yeah.
I don't know that it was in existence then. Of course, they imagined it. They projected that it would be feasible someday, but they couldn't do it at the time. I've never heard of that, of any kind of a lawsuit back then, but I do know that technology is being developed right now. And what's especially cool is that it's being developed more than likely by people that were kids when they were watching Star Trek. Talk about like coming full circle. A little kid watches something and they want to be an engineer when they grow up, like Scotty. Mm-hmm. And then they grow up and they develop something that they saw in Star Trek, or they see it as a kid and then they grow up and they become teachers and scientists and doctors and developed a technology that was just a dream for the future at the time.
And Nichelle Nichols, who played Uhura, motivated decades of women into the space program, and she was NASA's spokesperson for 30 years?
Yes.
Long time.
Easily.
Long time, yeah. Yeah. There's actually a rocket launch scheduled for the end of this month, launching either ashes or DNA of many of the Star Trek celebrities.
Right.
And Nichelle is in there, Gene and Majel are in there, Jimmy Doohan is in there. They just added DeForest Kelly. So decades later, here they are, and that ship is going to be launched into permanent orbit around the sun. So it's going to be out there, and the ship is obviously called Vulcan.
Yeah.
Love it.
And V'ger will scoop it up someday
Yes, they
in the
will.
future
That's
and bring
right.
it back.
Yes, it will be a message that will bring the aliens here.
Right?
Exactly.
So we are sitting in the recreated conference room having this interview here in Kingsland, Georgia, which has a very nice Starbucks we were just in, having some coffee. Population Kingsland, 17,000 roughly.
Sounds about right.
More or less.
Yeah.
More or less.
Yeah, it's part of Camden County, which is a bit larger, so that's good.
Not the place that you would think necessarily there will be a full-scale reproduction of the original 1966 original series sets. So I wanted to ask you guys, I know that the Star Trek Continues started going around 2013 when it was released.
Well, that was when our first episode was released, yes.
But how did this building come about?
Yes, please.
Well, this was before Ray was involved. I've been a Star Trek fan most of my life since I was a little boy. And my degree in college was in film and production, acting. I loved all of that. And in large part to the influence Star Trek had on me. Fast forward 4 decades, and I had met some people that were making a Star Trek fan production. And they asked me if I would direct an episode of their production. Of course, I thought, wow, that could be fun.
This was the Farragut people?
Yes.
Okay.
Starship Farragut. They had a tiny facility in St. Mary's, Georgia, which is only like 7 miles that way. It was a very small building, maybe 2,100, 2,200 square feet. It was vacant, and so the owner allowed them to, quote unquote, play Star Trek there.
Yeah.
So they built a small portion of the bridge. They built a scaled-down transporter room. It wasn't to scale because they didn't have much space. And so I went down, and I directed an episode for them. And what I wanted in terms of payment, compensation, was to be able to just make a little something for myself.
Yeah.
Bill Shatner was always my hero. I wanted to just play that character one time. As we were finishing that episode, the man that owned the building said, I've got somebody that wants to rent the building. You guys,
You gotta
you're not
move,
paying
right?
rent. You got to go. So they were looking at just mothballing, their sets, putting them in storage. By this point, the bug that I had at 10 years old had returned in full force. And I said to them, hey, what if I were to rent a building somewhere nearby and you guys move what you have to that building and then we'll draw up the floor plans and we'll build everything. No one's ever done it.
Yeah.
Myself and a couple of my friends, we will cover the costs of renting the building, buying the materials, and your local guys here that build and volunteer construction and stuff, you do the building, we'll provide the resources, and then once we finish, you can shoot episodes there and we'll shoot episodes there. And that's how it came to be in Kingsland, Georgia. And ironically, the man that owns this building we're sitting in also owned the building in St. Mary's that they were in.
Okay.
Really good guy, Bill
Yeah.
Gross. But shortly after we built all of this, Farragut decided they had been doing it for a while and they wanted to kind of take a different direction. And so I bought them out of their percentage of it, and it became all Star Trek Continues. And at the time, it was just on this half of the building. But after that point, around our 3rd episode, we took over the other side of the building as well and built things that had never been built before by any fan production since the original series. Engineering,
Right.
a planet set, interior planet set. And I'll tell you something else. You could never do this in a major city unless you're Elon Musk.
Right.
Unless you're a multi-millionaire. You could never rent an 18,000 square foot facility in Chicago or Houston or LA. It would be completely cost prohibitive. So I feel that it was very providential. There was a great deal of divine providence in how we came to be in Kingsland. And what's amazing is Jacksonville Airport is 25 minutes away.
Yeah.
I mean, you're within striking distance. It's a great little town. Everything you could want is here.
Yeah, it's got a Best
Hotels,
Western.
Restaurants.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, Walmart. I mean, Lowe's. We might as well have lived at Lowe's when we were building this place. And it's a great little town. I don't think it could have worked out any better. I really don't.
Now, Ray, how did you get involved in this giant thing that you now are presiding over?
Okay, so I was a big Star Trek fan, and there were several fan films that were already out there in production. And I liked them. I thought it was nice to see new Star Trek, even though they might have been different actors. And in 2013, I saw an episode called Pilgrim of Eternity, which was episode number 1 of Star Trek Continues. And I fell in love with it. It was just real Star Trek. Probably just a couple of months after that, I read that Vic was going to be appearing at either SuperCon or MegaCon, and I said, I have to meet this guy. And I went, and I stalked his table until he came out, and he spent and he didn't have to, he spent 10 or 15 minutes talking to me, and I was whatever. I was just, taken aback that I met this guy and I saw him and he was giving me this courtesy. And he gave me his email address. So I kind of stayed in touch with him on and off. I'd see him at different shows. I know he didn't know who I was. It's okay. I was working on a different production with a different company called Starbase Studios, which was in Oklahoma City, on a pilot that I was doing. And in 2017, I read that Star Trek Continues had finished production. So late in 17, I thought, hey, I'm just going to send a message to Vic. Maybe I could get some sets for Starbase. Who knows? So I just sent a very obscure letter that said, hey, Vic, now that you're done with Star Trek Continues, what are you doing with the sets? Honestly, George, never expecting him to read it, reply to it. But as they say...
His customer service is very good.
Very good.
I wrote Vic about 4 years ago, when I found Star Trek Continues way after it had ended, and just wrote him this nice short letter, and like within 4 hours, Vic had responded to me. So hats off to you, sir.
Well, that means your autoresponder is working.
No, this was a real
My
letter.
assistant is good.
Yeah.
No, actually, the truth is, let me just interject.
Yes, please.
5 seconds. I do not take for granted one person who has appreciated what we did. It was the biggest labor of love. It was a passion project. Mm-hmm. And when I hear from anyone, I mean, if somebody stops me in a grocery store and says, oh my gosh, Star Trek Continues, I love your show, we'll take pictures. I'll stand there for 10 minutes and talk to them, because it was my passion project, and it never ceases to humble me to hear from people that enjoyed it.
Yeah.
So I sent Vic an email. Mm-hmm. Later that same day, I get a message back from Vic, and all it says is, what do you have in mind? And at that point, I had no idea what I had in mind. But being a business person, I said, I can't go back with an idea. I've got to go back with like 4 ideas. And one of those ideas was, let's leave it where it is. Let's rebrand it. Let's open it up to the public. And I said, and by the way, here's my phone number if you ever want to call me. And later that same day, a phone rings, and hey, Ray, it's Vic. And I'm like, what? And I think we spent almost an hour talking about Star Trek and conventions, and not about Star Trek Continues, not about whatever. We just talked about Star Trek. And at the end of the call, Vic said, hey, do you want to come see the studio? And I was like, sure.
Now, where were you living at the time?
I still live in Boca Raton.
Okay.
And I had no idea where Kingsland, Georgia was. So he tells me, fly into Jacksonville Airport, blah, blah, blah. I said, okay, great. I got in a plane in West Palm Beach. The plane went up, the plane came down. I said, where am I? I was right here. I came up to the studio, and Vic met me at the door. And there was an entourage of people who had worked on Continues and construction. And he walked me through. This was in December of 17. I was just completely blown away. Vic asked me if I would give him a ride back to the airport, which I did. And by the time we reached the airport, he and I had reached an agreement. And I purchased the studio from Vic in January of 18. It wasn't until May that I was able to contact CBS and let them know what the plan was. And, they will never give me your blessing, but it was okay, but follow these rules.
Right.
And we announced it in May of 18. And I guess the rest is history.
So you still rent here, right?
I still rent.
Okay.
Correct.
But you run the facility and manage all the films that are shot here.
That's correct.
Things like that.
That's correct.
When you first started this, did it ever run through your mind like, how hard could this be?
You know what? The answer is yes. That's exactly what I thought. Hey, this is cool.
Yeah.
I'm going to own a starship.
Yeah, right. That's exactly right. And quickly, I realized that there are a lot of things to not necessarily Star Trek, but owning a business.
Yeah.
Part of which is, the social media aspect of it. Most of it is very positive, and then you get people who, I'm not quite sure why, but they have some objection to what you're doing.
Yeah.
One of the things I learned about social media when I first learned it, and this is back in 2014, the person who taught me said, thank the people who thank you and ignore everybody else.
Yeah.
And that's what I've done.
Yeah, you have to do that to make it work.
Exactly.
Now, Vic, your series, Star Trek Continues, was almost immediately recognized as some sort of canon within the Star Trek universe. It was the most faithful to the original series. It looked, it felt as if you were actually continuing the 5-year mission into years 4 and 5. You won a Wikipedia page full of awards and nominations for these series. You went back and found some of the actors who had been on the original show and carried their stories forward. That's a huge project.
Yeah. And I never imagined at the time I was going to do that. I tell the tours, usually by the time we hit sick bay, I tell the tours I only intended to make one episode. I just wanted, like I said earlier, to fulfill my childhood dream of playing the character that was my hero.
Yeah.
It was my father figure. My parents divorced when I was 9, and my mom and I moved into a little apartment. We didn't have any furniture, but what we did have was a 19-inch black and white television that sat on the floor in the living room because there was no table. And I would come home every day after school and lay on the floor and watch this show. And Captain Kirk very much became a father figure to me. So all I wanted to do was make one episode to say thank you, basically.
Yeah.
And when I did, I thought, okay, who knows how this is going to be received? Because as Ray just pointed out, Star Trek fans have a tendency to be very, how shall I say
Highly
it?
critical.
Yes, particular.
Yes.
Discriminating, right? I mean, and
As
so
Shatner himself once said, get a life.
yeah, like I thought to myself, they could quite possibly tear us to shreds.
Yeah.
But I did it for me to say thank you to that show. A lot of the things that I do now professionally, I tried for the first time as a little boy because of Star Trek.
Yeah.
So it had that kind of impact on me. So we made the first episode not really thinking long-term at all. I funded the first episode along with my friend Steven Dingler. We paid all the bills. Like, I paid to fly people down here. I paid to put them in hotels. I paid to feed them every day. I paid to rent the camera gear. I felt like if I want to do this, the old put your money where your mouth is.
Yeah.
If this is my dream, don't get online and ask people to give you a bunch of money for something that they don't know whether you can do or not. And so I invested in the first episode, and it was well received. I couldn't believe it. So we made a second, and it was well received. And it just kind of grew from there. But I want to tell you that I think what makes Star Trek Continues, and you know this if you're in production at all, there are 100 moving parts to a production. And if any one of them fails, it can considerably handicap the production. You could have great actors, and if you have a bad editor,
Right.
if he edits that film poorly, he can ruin that film. You could have amazing lighting, and if you have bad actors, it doesn't really matter how good the lighting is. You could build perfect sets, and if the story is lame, it really doesn't matter that you have perfect sets. There's so many things that have to come together to make a really solid, cohesive piece of work. And when you're talking about Star Trek, you got a high bar. And the thing that made Star Trek so memorable were the stories. It was the human condition,
Right.
and the social issues, and the moral questions, and the ethical quandaries.
Let that be your last battlefield was the famous one about the black and white cultures.
Absolutely. And Private Little War about the Vietnam War, and Mark of Gideon about overpopulation. And I mean, they took on all these issues. So before we ever shot one frame, I told myself, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to tell compelling Star Trek stories.
Yes.
It's not just going to be a bunch of old guys running around in uniform. There's nothing wrong with that. Please don't get me wrong. But it's not going to be that. It's not going to be, we're fans and we're just having fun. It's going to be a compelling, thought-provoking Star Trek type of story. And when we started, I received thousands of story ideas from Star Trek fans.
Sure.
Script ideas. And I'd get a page and a half in, and I would think to myself, what's this even about?
Right.
Like, it didn't grab me. It was Captain Kirk, beams down to the planet, fights the Klingons. I'm like,
Eats a donut.
No. Right? There has to be more. So I think what made it special was not only that our production crew did all of their jobs at top notch, like Matt Busey, my director of photography. As we were building this facility, he and I were watching Star Trek episodes and taking screen captures and studying the lighting plans.
Well, that was what was so fascinating about Continues, is that really for the first time, it captured the visual vibe and the auditory vibe. You got the echo proportions just right. So it sounded like it was an actual continuation. I was
Shotgun mics.
Yeah.
You'll
Is that what it
appreciate
was?
this. Nowadays, people clip on wireless lavs, right? They didn't have wireless lavs in 1966. They had a guy with a boom pole,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
And even my sound guy, my dear sound guy, Ralph Miller, who I love like a brother, he was constantly begging me to let him mic the actors with a belt pack and wire them. Well, number one, it doesn't sound the same.
It doesn't.
And number two, there was constant RF interference. And number three, those uniforms are pretty form-fitting.
Yeah.
So it's hard to hide that stuff. And so I kept saying, no, Ralph, if it was good enough for them, you
Right.
know, with a wind sock on a boom pole, following the actors as they talk, it's good enough for us. And so even down to that kind of minute detail was paid attention to.
So I have to ask you this question because it was the only anomaly, to use the Star Trek word, that I saw. Everything about Continues really matched the tone and vibe, except for some reason there was this woman who was on the set in a role that had not existed. What was that all about?
I got a story for you, bro. Sorry, Ray.
That's okay.
I was dating a young lady at the time,
Okay.
a very, very talented actress, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, she did a great job, but...
We were living in L.A.,
Okay.
and I started this, and I was thinking of casting who would I like to play this role. I don't know if you know this, but I do a lot of voice acting.
Oh, yes.
I've done over 400 different animated series and video games, and I had a lot of friends, voice actor friends, who are great actors. Chuck Huber is a great actor, and I wanted him to play McCoy. Todd Haberkorn is a great actor, and I wanted him to play Spock. So I was drawing from people that I knew, and Michelle and I were dating at the time, and I said, now, who can we have you play? And she and I were talking about it. Should she play Yeoman Rand?
Nurse Chapel?
Should she play Nurse Chapel?
Mm-hmm.
And in the back of my mind, I had always intended for Star Trek Continues to start subtly moving toward Next Generation.
The Counselor Troy role.
Exactly. Well, what was different
Yeah.
in Next Gen? What was common in Next Gen that didn't even exist in the original series?
Yeah.
One was the holodeck, and another one was a ship's counselor. Well, by the time Next Gen came out, ship's counselors were on every ship,
Yeah.
but not in the original series. So I said to her, why don't we create a new character, and it will be an experimental program that Starfleet is deciding whether or not this is a good idea.
Okay.
And if you watch Pilgrim of Eternity, she's chasing Kirk around the ship the whole time going, hi, I just got here. And Kirk's like, not now, right? And they didn't really even see the point of her
Yeah.
They're like, what's she do? We got Dr. McCoy. What do we need her for? And then you get to our 4th episode, and she provides a great deal of insight to Kirk, and there's a beautiful scene at the end where she comes down to the chair and she says, I just want to thank you for approving my request for a separate office. And Kirk says, well, if I ever had any doubt about the need for a ship's counselor, I don't anymore. And I believe she had the hardest job of any of the actors.
Because it was new.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How do you create and hold your own with these iconic characters like Sulu and Chekhov and Uhura and Scotty? And she did an amazing job. So that's how that character came to be.
He's gone now, but I remember reading that the happiest person to be involved with your show was Grant Imahara from Mythbusters.
I love that man. He was one of the kindest souls ever. He and I became friends. We both were guests at Dragon Con one year, and we were asked to host the Masquerade, the cosplay contest. So we're sitting at the judges' table, and we're becoming buddies. Years later, I saw him at a party in L.A., and he said, what are you working on right now? And I pulled my phone out, and I showed him photos of half-built sets.
Yeah.
And he was like, I love Star Trek. And suddenly a little light bulb went off in my mind. I'm like,
hello?
I haven't cast Sulu yet. Oh, my gosh. He'd be perfect. And he was.
He was. He was over the moon.
He was like a kid in a candy store. He loved it. And whenever we had mechanical problems, he would fix them.
So I want to jump in for a second and say something about Continues and maybe more about Vic. Anyone who has followed fan films knows that there are some very good fan films out there.
Yeah.
And many of them have many episodes. And the cast of characters, the actors have changed. It's constant in fan films. Vic not only did a wonderful job in casting the right people to play the right role, but those people were in all 11 episodes.
Yes.
And that's a testament to Vic, the production crew, the fact that, we have our own series that we do, Tales from the Neutral Zone. And I say to people all the time, and I learned this from Vic, if you're not having fun, we shouldn't be here.
Well, the reception to Continues and just the whole element of production that you did really became the gold standard. Everybody compares themselves to Continues in one way or another.
Well, that's incredibly humbling. And, I want to springboard off what Ray said. There was only one exception, and it was just for a brief time. Chuck Huber was always who I intended to play Dr. McCoy. I don't know if you know that before we even released our first episode, we released 3 vignettes.
Okay.
The purpose of those vignettes was to introduce the world to these actors in these roles, so that by the time the first episode came out, you didn't spend the first 20 minutes going,
who is that?
I'm not buying this guy as Spock.
Yeah.
No, you already know who it is, so that was the intention. And Chuck Huber was Dr. McCoy. 1 month before we were supposed to shoot our first episode, Chuck had a family emergency. And he said, I can't make it. And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, I can't get the first episode off the ground. Already I'm losing somebody. Well, divine providence again. Larry Nemeczek, who is very well known in Star Trek circles, I knew him. I'd interacted with him before. And Larry said to me, I love Dr. McCoy the way you love Jim Kirk.
Right.
And I said to him, do you have any acting experience? Because that was the most important thing to me. Doesn't matter if you look like somebody.
Right.
Right? Within 10 seconds, if you can't act, it doesn't matter that you look like Leonard Nimoy. It really doesn't. And he said, Joe, yeah. So he stepped in and saved us and played Dr. McCoy for our first episode.
Okay.
And then he played Dr. McCoy for our second episode. But during our second episode, Chuck Huber came back to me and said, crisis averted. I'd sure love to get back involved somehow.
Yeah.
And so I talked to Larry Nemeczek and I said, Larry, I love you to death. Thank you for stepping in and helping out. But Chuck was who I always intended to play this role. And Larry was so gracious. He said, oh, I totally get it. And I said, you're still part of our family. In fact, you can be our technical advisor because Larry knows everything about Star Trek. Mm-hmm. Be our creative consultant. And so Chuck Huber took over the role back again as McCoy, starting with episode 3. And then, as Ray said, we had no attrition. And that's unheard of.
It is.
In fan productions.
Absolutely.
Because if you can't pay somebody, they may do something once as a favor.
Right.
But they're not going to drive hundreds of miles and take time off work and take time away from their family and lose money time after time after time to do the same thing. But our production cast and crew were so committed and enthusiastic about what we were doing. They sensed that it was something special. We all made such close friendships that it became very much a family. We had a rare combination of getting great work done and also having a good time doing it. And Larry Nemechek continued to come down. Every episode, he would be walking around here taking pictures and shooting videos with the cast. He continued to be a part of and if we got to a moment in a scene where we're like, hey, Larry, what is Thorazine supposed to do in certain situations? And he'd come running in and he'd give us a whole diatribe about a particular detail so that we could make sure and get it right.
Now, there's one guy, I've been told, who has been in every Star Trek iteration since the original series. Deep Space Nine, Strange New Worlds that just came out, the animated series, and that's Clint Howard, who played Baylock.
Oh, wow.
Did he ever appear here or get associated with you? Because it seems like he's a natural
You
to
know what? Oh,
continue.
my goodness. You know,
This is Ron Howard's brother.
I know Clint. I know Clint well, and it's funny that you should say that. There was a book series that was written called These Are the Voyages. They literally are about the making of the series.
Yeah.
The behind the scenes. And they include like memos back and forth between CBS and Roddenberry, memos between the production team, and the challenges that they had in making this show. Well, I was asked to do an audiobook version of it. And I thought, wouldn't it be extra special if I, instead of just me reading the whole book and maybe throwing in a characterization voice from time to time, get as many of the people that are quoted in the book to actually read their own excerpts.
Yeah.
And I'm talking Dorothy Fontana, D.C. Fontana, Bobby Clark, Joe D'Agosta.
Okay.
He was a casting director for TOS. And I was living in L.A. They came to my place. Clint Howard lived right down the street from me in Studio City. I didn't even know that, but they connected me with him, and he came over to my place, and we had a great time. We chatted for probably an hour, and then it only took 10 minutes to record his excerpt.
Yeah.
But by this time, I think Star Trek Continues was over. But he would have been an amazing addition. Not Baylock, of course.
Right, sure.
But play some character.
Well, he
role.
recreated Baylock, I believe, for the
Yes.
Shatner roast that was on 10 years or so ago,
Yes.
which was hilarious.
Yes.
Really hilarious.
Yes. I love Clint. He's a great, great guy. He would have been fun to have on.
Ray, last question to you. This facility here is uniquely put together, but it's one kind of a network of places that have recreated elements of Star Trek. Tell me about the other locations around the country that have all or part of a Star Trek set.
So there aren't too many that are TOS.
Okay.
But there are a lot of facilities. As a matter of fact, there's one in South Carolina, and I'll give him a shout out. Frank Parker Jr. has a set that's more Wrath of Khan.
Okay.
And we're going to be doing some filming, and we want to create the Enterprise C. But there are several other TOS studios or sets.
There's Ticonderoga in New York, right?
Ticonderoga is a museum.
Okay.
It's beautiful. I've been there, but they're not filming.
Okay.
So it's not a film studio.
Okay.
There's another film studio called Warp 66, which is in Alabama or some square state.
Okay.
They have recreated many of the sets.
Isn't that where Josh is?
He's in Arkansas.
Okay.
And so they've created some of the sets, not to the same degree that this studio is in. They have like half a bridge and then, the outside wall of the building. But many of their sets are spread out. So when you're finished filming here, get in a car or drive wherever you have to go, and you can pick that up. But it's beautiful, and I know those folks. This is, I was going to say unique, but it's special.
It is very special, and the weekends you have here are quite special.
Yes, they sure are. But film-wise, there have been something like 65 productions that have been done in this building. Continues did 11. We have Tales from the Neutral Zone, and we've done 7 or 8. And I've employed Vic to direct. He also has a cameo as a Klingon.
I saw that. Yes.
Yeah.
Really?
And we are very
Mousy
proud of the. We are very proud of the
You
work
were sort
that
of
we do.
pixie Klingon. You
Yeah,
had that kind
mousy.
of twinkle in your eye.
It was that Bugs Bunny. Remember the big dog and the little dog
Yeah.
and the little dogs. Yeah, you tell him what he said. He's going to beat you up. And it was that kind of a take on the Klingon.
Exactly. I'm very proud. We follow more the Paramount CBS guidelines. So rather than have continuing characters, we're kind of one and out, or maybe one and then later on have another sequel to it.
Okay.
It's interesting. I have been, and I'm going to use a word that Vic used because I use it all the time. I've been very humbled by some of the reactions of people who come up to me and want to shake my hand or hug me or thank me. For a while, I was actually on the road with some of the bridge sets pre-COVID. And what I learned quickly is this is a place that people did not expect to actually visit in their lifetime.
Yeah.
That's what I learned. It's what keeps things going. It's just what keeps things going.
Mid-century modern architecture fans know that the whole attraction of this is this time that it was popular was about optimism and the future, and the vibe of going into a modernist house was just so positive. Star Trek has something similar in that in the original series and since then, Earth kind of got its act together. People were treating each other with respect and dignity, which was a message that you just didn't see in the world in 1966. Do you think that's part of the allure of why people are so drawn to this obscure little sci-fi series from 50-some years ago?
In a word, yes. One of the phrases we use in some of our advertising is come as you are or who you want to be. And we get people in here that are in costume to the hilt. And they come in and the doors open and you can see the reaction in their faces. But people, just like Vic said, people will send scripts. And it's hard because as a fan production, you know, there's got to be some money involved.
Yeah.
And, you know, they think, well, here's a script. Well, that's not really how it works. But every one of them that I've read is some positive future. And I think that's what's missing in the world today is the positivity. We want to go to Mars. Well, what are we going to take with us to Mars? That's really the question. Gene Roddenberry and the writers, they created a future that we all want to be in. Whether we get there or not might be another story, but I think there's a future that we all aspire to be in.
I think there's actually a big sign on the other side of Saturn that we can't see that says, aliens, don't stop at Earth. You do not want to come here for a while.
I agree.
You know, so much of sci-fi has been and still continues to be very dystopian, you know, very dark, gritty underbelly, like, you know, it's a rough future and seedy. And I'm quite certain that one of the things that made Star Trek so unique was a completely different take.
Yeah.
That people put aside their petty differences, they let go of their infantile prejudices for the greater good, and they reached out into space together, unified to make friends and to meet new species. I did an interview several months ago where the interviewer asked me if I believed that that future was feasible, was possible. I don't want to be a downer, but I will be. My feeling about it is as long as human beings are greedy, as long as there is a sense of me first and my greed and my desires and my craving for whatever, power, money, influence, prestige, as long as that exists, especially in high levels, the Star Trek future is just as much fiction as the TV show was.
Well, until then.
And I want for it. Believe me, I would love it. We would all love it. But I think some major human tendencies would need to shift dramatically for that to happen. And we pray that it does, certainly.
If I could get 10 seconds.
Sure.
I'm going to make a pitch to your listeners. If anybody out there has a mid-century Madison chair, which is so difficult to find, I will deal whatever they want to deal.
Oh, yeah, they've got it. I'm sure someone has it.
Oh, yeah. The good old Madison executive office.
Yeah.
Exactly.
We'll find it for you, Ray.
Thank you. I appreciate it, George.
Gentlemen, it's such a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you.
Thank you, George.
That was George with Ray Tesi and Vic Mignogna.
Jazz vocalist Amanda Carr was born into a family of big band musicians. After an early foray into rock, she took up the family sound and became a leading singer, focusing on fresh interpretations of the great American songbook. Amanda has performed with the Boston Pops, the Glenn Miller Orchestra, the Artie Shaw Orchestra, the Harry James Band, the Eurojazz Festival in Italy, and she created and starred in a cross-country tribute to Peggy Lee. Nat Hentoff of the Wall Street Journal called Amanda a true jazz singer in a time of wannabes. Nice. Welcome, Amanda.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on the show. Finally.
Rock was your thing as a teenager, and you were playing clubs pretty early. How old were you?
I started professionally at 14, and I was doing a solo, actually, with a Fender Rhodes and some chords. And back then, you could kind of do that thing without somebody calling the parent board on you. But at 15, I was in my first band, and it was a rock band, a rock cover band, and I played and sang.
What was your go-to title that you did back then?
Did everything from Linda Ronstadt to Fleetwood Mac to I'm trying to think way back then. It was a long time ago, but just really kind of the rock covers of the day.
Right.
Just kind of everything, because I wasn't the only singer in the band, so there were male singers too. But I just started singing covers, and to this day, I love singing cover tunes. That you have to kind of wear the hat of whoever you're singing, and that's fun for me.
Now, when did you get bit by the jazz bug in your performances?
Well, I was in my early 30s, and my mom was asking me to fill in for her on some of the big band gigs, and which was very easy for me to do because it was just kind of effortless. And I realized that I really loved doing it, and I loved the lyrics. I liked the way that when you sing big band, it's old school. For example, you just stick to the melody and you sing the song. There's not really a lot of personal interpretation. It's really more about your sound and really those subtleties that give you your identity. So that led me to say, I wonder what I'll sound like if I record this stuff. I wonder what I would sound like. So I did a demo recording. And the demo recording, a major furniture store picked up one of the songs and put it on their commercials. And a producer from Italy wrote to me and said, your friend played me this song. We want you to come over for, to tour the Eurojazz Festival. And all this stuff happened from the demo that I decided to do a full-length CD. And then 5 CDs later, that's just been kind of my legacy. But yeah, that's when I got bit with the bug, was in my early 30s.
Well, let's hear what Amanda sounds like. The Tender Trap was written by Jimmy Van Heusen, Frank Sinatra's favorite composer, with lyrics by Sammy Cahn for the 1955 film The Tender Trap, where it was sung separately by Debbie Reynolds and Sinatra. Covered by Ella Fitzgerald, Sammy Davis Jr., Steve Lawrence, Robert Palmer, and past podcast guest Stacey Kent, here's Amanda with The Tender Trap.
See a pair of laughing eyes, and suddenly you're sighing sighs. You're thinking nothing's wrong, you string along, boy, then snap. The Those eyes, those sighs, they're part of the tender trap. You're hand in hand beneath the trees, and soon there's music in the breeze. You're acting kind of smart until your heart just goes whap. Those trees, that breeze, they're part of the tender trap. Some starry night, when his kisses will make you tingle, he'll hold you tight, and you'll hate yourself for being single. And all at once it seems so nice. The folks are throwing shoes and rice. You hurry to a spot that's just a dot on the map. You're hooked, you're cooked, you're caught in the tender trap.
I can just see the couples gliding across the floor wanting to dance to that. That's great, Amanda.
Thank you. Yeah, it's so neat to listen to that. I rarely listen to my stuff, and it's been a while since I've heard that. And my drummer was my mentor, and he's the one that put together my quartet, and it was driven by guitar versus piano for a particular reason of just having to play space and sparseness. And so I pay homage to Kenny Hadley for that.
Who is the guitarist on that?
John Wilkins.
Very sweet.
Yeah, who did a stint playing with the Boston Pops. And, he's really he's just such a wonderful accompanist and understated everybody in the band. The whole thing was really about subtlety and understatement.
Amanda, speaking of Boston, you've been involved in a lot of projects focused on iconic Boston institutions. The Pops, the Red Sox, the Boston Strong Anthem.
Yeah.
I was wondering, is the band Boston still around? I mean, they were huge back when we were in high school. I never hear about them anymore.
Yeah, no, I think Brad Delt has passed away, and there's a lot of tribute Boston bands now, just like all the other iconic bands. More and more you're seeing the tribute bands that are, kind of carrying the torch, but the band Boston is no longer together for quite some time now.
It was one of those phases where bands named themselves after cities. There was Boston, there was Kansas, right? There was Chicago.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just a bunch of them. I think Chicago and Kansas are still going.
Yeah, there's a Miami Sound Machine.
Right, that's close.
Yeah.
The Atlanta Rhythm Section.
Good, Tom. You can just reel them off.
I know. This sounds like a trivia show now.
I know.
We are a trivia show, pretty much. This next song was written by the great Hoagie Carmichael. It's a favorite in the American Songbook. It's been covered by Barbra Streisand, Norah Jones, Annie Lennox, Frank Sinatra, Sheena Easton, and even the Rolling Stones. The 1956 Ella Fitzgerald and Louis Armstrong album of duets included a version of this, accompanied by Oscar Peterson on piano, Ray Brown on bass, and Herb Ellis on guitar, joined by Buddy Rich on drums. What a group. The album reached #1 on the Billboard Magazine Jazz chart. Here's Amanda with one of my favorite songs, The Nearness of You.
It's not the pale moon that excites me, that thrills and delights me. Oh no, it's just the nearness of you. Sweet conversation that brings this sensation. Oh no, it's just the nearness of you. When I'm in your arms and I feel you so close to me, all my wildest dreams come true. I need no soft lights to enchant me. You'll only grant me the right to hold you ever so tight and to feel in the night the nearness of you.
All right. That is beautiful.
Very classy.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that was in Italy.
Oh, that's where that was recorded?
Yeah, that was a live concert in Italy in a little town called San Giorgio. And it was in a church at the base of the Alps. It was really beautiful. It was so nice to listen to that and have memories. Yeah. Wow. That was Luigi Martinelli.
You can't get any more romantic than that. A little church.
I know it
the
was.
base of the Alps.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was lovely.
Amanda, if you ever want to come to Durham, we have a wonderful jazz club here called Sharp 9. Small venue run by a nonprofit group, regularly sells out though. We'd love to have you come and visit and perform.
Well, I would love to be there. You just let me know where to stick the pin on the calendar. And
okay.
I always enjoy finding local musicians and working with them and seeing what we can come up with. That's exciting to me.
The website is amandacarr.com. That's AMANDACARR.com. Thanks for joining us, Amanda.
Oh, thank you. I was just going to mention there's not a lot of jazz on amandacarr.com right at the moment, but certainly if you look me up on Spotify or any of the other digital platforms, it's mostly jazz. So There you have it.
Thanks for listening. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by June Goldfinger and Jeff Taylor, sponsors of Circle Square Triangle, a traveling exhibition on the architecture of Myron Goldfinger, and by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Toronto, Los Angeles, Palm Springs, and Malibu.
Visit usmodernist.org's massive archives to listen to past shows, discover documentation of 20,000 significant modernist houses, and access 4.3 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song was performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl, with guest research by archivist Kelly Policelli. U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive Incorporated, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Guild. George and I will be back soon with another Where No One Has Gone Before edition of U.S. Modernist Radio.
Perfect.